Hey, everybody, welcome back. We are finishing up our Fruit of the Spirit series, Joy. And at the end of every series, I'd like to do a journal with me in my Bible because I love to Bible journal. I like to dig deeper, and that's how I learn more about what the passages say. And I have my notes with me all the time, and I don't always have to refer back to a commentary once I've made those notes. So today we are going to read in James verses 1 through 4. And if you don't know who James is, he is the half brother of Jesus. And James did not believe that Jesus was the Messiah. And, so their family was no different than yours and mine. Brothers think that they're lying and they're not telling the truth and, whatever. And this one was just on a much bigger level. But the thing that turned James for him to believe that Jesus was actually the Messiah was the resurrection. So he's writing this, and verse 1 is just the introduction to the greeting. So let's just go ahead and start reading this. I'm going to read this one in the ESV version. If you've watched my past ones, that I like to read in at least 3 different translations so that we can see if there's any differences between the translations and make any notes that might be useful. So let's go ahead and read James 1:1. James, a servant of God and the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes in the dispersion, greetings, testing your faith. And remember that these subject headings, they weren't originally in the canon, they were added later. So count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness, and let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. Okay, so right away, anytime you see anything repeated, we're going to make note of it. So steadfastness and steadfastness. So we're going to make note of those two. We're going to come back later and we're going to do a word study on those, and we're going to see what that means, because in the past, when I've done a word study on steadfastness in other verses, and the Greek or the Hebrew word was hesed, and that meant a love like no other. It's so great that there really isn't a proper definition for it. So we're going to do a word study on this one in this verse and see if it means the same thing. Just looking at context, I wouldn't think so, but you don't know until you do that word study and dive deep and see what it says. So again, this was the ESV version. And so next I'm going to read out of the New King James Version. Okay, here I have the New King James Version. So let's just go ahead and read. So James 1, greetings, a bondservant of God, of the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes which are scattered abroad. Greetings. My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. But let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. So already right here we can tell that the word that we circled in the ESV was steadfastness. But here the New King James Version uses patience and patience. So I'm going to go back to my ESV, and I'm going to connect these and then draw a line here. And I'm going to write New King James Version, patience. Okay, so we will come back to this. Let me get my third translation, which is going to be the NIV, the New International Version. Okay, now I have my NIV, so let's just go ahead and read the verse or the passage. James 1, James, a servant of God and the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes scattered among the nations. Greetings. Trials and temptations. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work, so that you may mature and complete, not lacking anything. So this is so cool. Each translation had a different word. So this translation has perseverance and perseverance. Okay, so the ESV had steadfastness, the New King James Version had patience, and the NIV has perseverance. Interesting. All right, so I'm back at my in my ESV journaling Bible. So I'm going to make the note over here that the NIV is perseverance. Okay, so I am going to box this in. I'm going to leave a space right here because when we do our word study, it uses the NASB lexicon. And so if that uses a different word than the three of these, I want to have space right here. So I'm just going to put that NASB lex. All right. So now I like to get my pencils, my trusty coloring pencils, and I'm just going to color this in because I want everything in the same color. I want to know that those all go together. So I'm going to color this in. And then I'm also going to highlight the line so that I know that all of this goes here. The next thing we're going to look at in our different translations, which I don't think is going to matter that much, but I did want to point them out so that you can just get used to looking at the different translations to see if there are differences. So the ESV says, and let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. So the New King James Version says, but let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. Okay, so this is pretty much the same. Now let's break out the NIV and see what it says. So it says, let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. So where the other two versions say perfect and complete, the NIV just says mature and complete. And just because I might want to remember that one day, I am just going to make that note that mature. And we may also want to look up this word perfect while we are doing the word study for steadfastness, because perfect to us, when we use the word perfect, we think it means without blemish, without fault. It means perfect. But as we saw in the last journal with me for love, we saw that was not necessarily what that perfect meant. So we're going to look it up in the lexicon to see what the original text is saying here. Does it mean without fault, without blemish, without spot, without sin, without, or does it mean something different? Does it just mean mature like the NIV says? I'm going to go ahead and do this in a different color. And then let me box this in. And then whenever we do the word study, On perfect, whatever we find out, I will write it over here in my column and then box it in and color it with the same color so I know that that goes with this. And the same here when we do the word study for steadfastness. And I already have this in the same color, so I know that that goes with this. I will do the definition over here or whatever the word study says, whatever the Hebrew or the Greek word is. Since this is the New Testament, it's written in Greek. I will do what the Greek word is and what the definition is, so that, and color it in the same color so that I know that all of that goes with steadfastness. Here I typed in, just in Google, James 1:3 Bible Hub Lexicon, and then I'm going to come here to the top search and click on there. And this is what it looks like when it pulls up, and you can see here that this is James 3. Here's the verse here. Here's the Greek because it's in the New Testament, so it's in Greek. And then here's the Strong's number with a little bit of a definition out beside it. So what we wanted to look at was, I knew that in the NASB, sometimes it says something different than what our Bibles, the translations that I was using, says. And sure enough, this one says endurance. And so here is the Greek word for endurance, and then the Strong's number, and it says remaining behind, a patient enduring. And let's just click on the Strong's number and it'll bring us here. So again, here is the Greek word, and it's endurance, perseverance, patience, steadfastness. So there we go. It's a noun, it's feminine. There's the word, the Greek word again. KJV, enduring, patient, countenance, waiting. And then the NASB is what we just read. And then this one says cheerful or hopeful, endurance, constancy. So that's that for that word study. The next study I wanted to do is for the word perfect in verse 4. And again, here is, I pulled up James 1:4. And all you have to do on Bible Hub is just hit the arrows to go to the different verses. And so, and let endurance have its perfect result, so that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. So we wanted to look at the word perfect since it was in there more than once, and see what it says. We had done a word study on in the last Journal With Me video for Fruit of the Spirit Love on perfect as well. So I just wanted to see if this perfect was the same as the last one. And you come over, and here is the Greek. So for perfect here, and it is the same as it was in the last word study. Here is the Strong's number, and having reached its end, i.e. complete, by extent, perfect. So let's just go ahead and click on the Strong's and come over and look. Here is the Greek. Perfect, complete, mature, full grown. So it does not mean perfection. It does not mean that there's no, it doesn't mean that it's without spot, without blemish, without sin. It's not the perfect that you and I usually think of when we say perfect. Okay, since we did our word studies, I'm going to go ahead and put the one for steadfast up above here, and I'm just going to draw an arrow to it to kind of use this space up here, and then I'll do the one for perfect down here. So as we can see, even though each translation had a different word, so we actually looked at 4 different translations using the New American Standard Bible and the lexicon. Steadfastness in the ESV, patience, New King James Version, and perseverance, NIV. It just because each translation said a different word, it doesn't mean it changed the meaning of what was said, because in the original text, the Greek, and I'm not even going to try to say it, but this is the Greek, and each of those words is mentioned as a definition for the Greek word. So even though there were different words, I just need you to understand that it's the same meaning, just when it's translated into our language, we can use different words, same meaning. So now I'm going to put the word study for perfect here, and we'll look, because the NIV said instead of perfect, it said mature. So the ESV and the New King James both said perfect. The NIV said mature, and we'll put everything for the word study right here so we can make sure that we know what this means, and whether it means perfection, or whether it means mature, or what it means. And that way, whenever we come back to this verse in the future, we can always know what it means. So we see from the word study that the Strong's number is 5046. Teleos is the Greek word, and it just means perfect, complete, mature, or full grown. It does not mean perfection. It does not mean without fault, without sin, without spot, without blemish. It does not mean that in this sense. So the NIV replacing this word or using this word, mature instead of perfect, it means the same thing in the original language, teleos. So it does not change the meaning, that different words were used. And this, now we know, does not mean that you have to be perfect, or that you have to get everything right all the time. It just means complete, or that you're maturing, or you're growing. Now that we have our word studies done, let's go back and read verses 2 through 4. Since 1 is just the greeting, we don't really need to go back over that. So count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness, or patience, or perseverance, or endurance. And let endurance have its full effect, that you may be mature and complete, lacking in nothing. So that kind of sometimes it makes the verse a little bit easier to understand when you replace it with one of the other words. Because if this translation had said mature right here, we probably wouldn't have questioned it. But since it said perfect, and we use perfect most of the time in a different way, then this word study was necessary so that we could make sure that we understood what it meant. Now I want to switch over to commentaries so that we can make sure that we understand completely what the verses mean. Today I want to just use the NIV, Dr. David Jeremiah Study Bible. And if you don't know what a study Bible is, it has the verses up here at the top of the Bible, and then down here at the lower half, it has commentary. So you really, I used other commentaries along with it, but this has commentary on its own. So let's see what this commentary has to say. So verses 1, or chapter 1, verses 1 through 12, the first section of this book is about being tested for toughness. James calls God's training regiment trials of many kinds. So I want to mark 2 through 12. And I'm just going to put on here God's training. Training regimen. And I'm running out of room, so I'm going to put trials of many kinds. All right. So that lets me know. Let me get another pencil. So this, we're just going to highlight in yellow and do this in yellow. I just think that's kind of neat to have there. I guess I could have brought that under there, but oh well, it is what it is. Okay, back to the commentary. So for verse 2, to consider it pure joy means to appraise one's situation intelligently, confident of the good that God can do through it. That's real important. Jesus demonstrates this in his life, and you can read that in Hebrews 12:2. The trials that God allows strengthen the believer and are different from the consequences of sin in a believer's life. So it's just pretty much saying that this is not a consequence, that the trial that you're going through is going to strengthen you and knowing that God can get you through it. And that's where your joy comes from. I like to journal and I like to write a lot of stuff in my Bible, like I said, so that when I come back to it, I will always know what it means and I can see the work that I did and the things that I looked up so I don't ever have to do it again. My notes are really special and they're really important to me. And so, anyway, I take a lot of notes to keep in my Bible. I did change from just a regular Bible to a journaling Bible, but I can tell already because we're only in this section right here, and this is the space that I've taken up, and I'm not even done. I went ahead, which I swore I wasn't going to add more pages to this Bible, but I have no choice. I went ahead and wrote the part of the commentary that I liked on verse 2, to consider it pure joy, or in the ESV it says count it all joy, means to appraise one's situation intelligently, confident of the good that God can do through it and get you through it. So I went ahead and made that. I'll end up doing a tip in where I'll put glue on and it'll sit right here. So that way, the further down I go, I still have plenty of room to take notes. I'm also going to make note of trials right here. And in the commentary, it says different from Okay, so I just put different from consequences of sin. They strengthen us. So trials are not consequences of sin. It's something God uses to strengthen us. All right, the commentary for verse 3. Perseverance does not require us to resign ourselves to whatever happens, but to have a tough resolve or brave endurance in adverse circumstances. Trials produce durability as well as maturity. I highlighted, for you know the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. In orange, and then I made my note from the commentary in orange, perseverance, and I went ahead and put steadfastness, patience, endurance from our word study, does not require us to resign ourselves to whatever happens, but to have a tough resolve or brave endurance, there's that one of those words, in adverse circumstances. Trials produce durability as well as maturity, and we also use maturity in one of the word studies. Okay, and finishing up with verse 4. This commentary is the NIV, and remember the NIV uses mature in place of perfect that the ESV used. So mature means to be fully and completely developed. Complete refers to being whole. Without trials, Christians cannot develop to maturity or wholeness. Okay, I hope you enjoyed all of that. Let's put it all together. We were reading in James chapter 1, verses 1 through 4. James is the half brother of Jesus, and he's writing to the 12 tribes that are now dispersed. So the section that with the first verses 2 through 4, we're reading, that's what we wanted to do the journaling on. So it says, count it all joy, brothers, when you meet trials. And we learned that trials are different from consequences of sin. They're what strengthen us. So meet trials of various kinds. And up here we put, to consider it pure joy or to count it all joy means to appraise one's situation intelligently, confident of the goal of the good that God can do through it and get you through it. Then we said, to keep reading, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. We did the word study on steadfastness because it was used twice, so we wanted to make sure we understood what that meant. And we found out that it just means endurance, perseverance, patience. And then, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. So that's perseverance. Does not require us to resign ourselves to whatever happens, but to have a tough resolve or brave endurance in adverse circumstances. Trials produce durability as well as maturity. So to continue reading in verse 4, and let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. Well, we did a word study on perfect just to make sure we understood what that meant. Did it mean that we actually have to be perfect and do everything right and we can't mess up and there's no choice but for us to be perfect? No, that is not what that means. We did the word study and we found out teleos means perfect, complete, mature, full grown. The NIV version says mature. So this perfect actually means mature or complete or full grown and lacking in nothing. And so we wrote over here, mature or perfect means to be fully and completely developed. Complete refers to being whole. Without trials, Christians cannot develop to maturity or wholeness. I hope you enjoyed Bible journaling and digging deeper into the Word. It's one of my favorite things to do. Stay tuned till next time.